I cannot get this to just do slideshow. Let me try one more way. There we go. Okay. So I am very excited to talk to you about the South Carolina College and Career Ready English Language Arts Standards. So here we go. So first of all, know that there's a very cool thing now. We have an app for the 2023 South Carolina College and Career Ready English Language Arts Standards. And you can either download it to your phone or even download it to your computer. So that makes it very easily accessible. However, if you don't want to use an app, we can use the old-fashioned way, which the old-fashioned way is just going through the various links, using the South Carolina Department of Education website. Start by going to the website, then select District and Schools, and then Standards. Oops. And then after you get to Standards, select English Language Arts, and of course, Standards. And then this is important. Then click on the 2023 Standards. I'll say that again. Click on the 2023 Standards. And the reason this is important is because what's going to pop up first is the 2015 Standards. Now, the 2015 Standards are going to be on the website until June of 24 because that's when they expire. But this is what it looks like when you get there. And of course, that is the link there at the top. But when you get there, you're going to see the standards. You can go straight to the standards. You're also going to have a plethora of instructional resources, which I'm going to outline in a moment, and then also various professional learning opportunities. So what's exciting about this is as the standards were put together, they were rolled out over this past year. So the 2023-24 school year, I was part of a group that rolled out the new English Language Arts standards across the state. It very specifically in order to present information about the ELA standards from the lens of special education. Now, what's very important to point out at this moment is that in every single rollout session that I attended, one of the things that I emphasized over and over, matter of fact, we asked everyone in the room if they knew the name of their SPED director. We asked that they must include the SPED director, the SPED teachers, and all special education personnel. Now, why would we be asking your district ELA people to very much ensure that SPED directors and SPED personnel were included? Well, we showed them this slide. It's because under federal law, IDEA states that the purpose of specially designed instruction is to, bottom line, to ensure access to the general education curriculum in order to meet the educational standards, including ELA standards, that apply to all children. So again, this is what makes training both gen ed and special ed so incredibly important and powerful. It's because we are all there for the same purpose. Now, IDEA also outlines that specially designed instruction is based on the unique and individual needs of the student, as well as adapting the content, methodology, and delivery of the instruction, which allows us to work towards achieving grade level standards. But this specially designed instruction supports, and it looks a lot like doing instruction in a different way, providing those strategies for learning, adding the extra repetition, providing scaffolding, the additional practice and feedback, developing those underlying skills, providing more time in explicit instruction. So again, this was provided to general education so that they would have a good understanding of the differences between the two. Now, some of you may be wondering, oh my Lord, we're having new ELA standards. We're getting a new IEP system. We have a new ELA curriculum. Why, oh, why are we doing ELA standards now? Well, the reason we're doing ELA standards now is because there's a cyclical review required every 7 years. Also know that academic standards are actually required by law. And the reason for that is because academic standards define what all students should know and what they should be able to do. And in doing so, this ensures that there's common and consistent expectations of what they'll learn, and it helps to inform both our instruction and our assessments. Now, as we get into an overview, a gross overview of the South Carolina ELA standards, I want to begin with this quote, and Lisa McClimate, and I love this quote. So it simply says, there simply is not true. It's not true that there's hundreds of ways to learn to read when it comes to reading. We all have roughly the same brain that imposes the same constraints, and there's a need for that same learning sequence. The whole reason we include this is because the research, the science of reading, the research about how children learn to read has had some remarkable discoveries. And one of them is that there are specific skills that students need to master, and they need to learn them systematically, building from simple to complex, and they have to be taught explicitly, meaning it goes from the teacher's mouth to the student's ears. Now, you may have heard of them referred to as the Big Five, or you may have heard that the specific skills as part of our rule out question, which is that the presence of a disability must not be due to a lack of systematic and explicit instruction in, and you could probably recite this in your sleep like I can, phonemic and phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. So what you see here there are 4 strands within our new ELA standards, 4 strands, and they encompass all of those skills that we just listed as part of the rule out. Now, to point out the difference between the 2015 and the 2023 standards, one of the greatest things that I think about the new standards is that they are very concentrated. In fact, the 2023 ELA standards represents a 33% reduction in the total number of strands, a 50% reduction in the number of standards, and a 56% reduction in the number of indicators. So the benefit of all of this is we have better focus, and as a result, there's better achievability. One or two other things to point out is that, yes, there's 4 strands, but there's also something that's referred to as overarching expectations. Now, overarching expectations are not a separate strand of learning statements, but it's really looking more at the evolving learning expectations. In other words, overarching expectations are fundamental skills and processes that are interwoven throughout all of ELA. You really can't separate them out. Also, the foundations of literacy standards, it's important to know why they are referred to as the foundations of literacy. And it's because these are those very specific foundational skills, and they apply primarily just to grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. And foundations of literacy is really focusing on those critical skills needed in order to master reading, in order to be proficient readers and writers. And so they include some of the ones I just mentioned: explicit, systematic instruction in phonemic and phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, as well as concepts of print. Now, as I get into describing each of these, just again, as a very simple overview, I want to point out the difference between a standard and an indicator, because this is one of the questions that we got a good bit. So a standard is really what they're expected to know by the end of their academic career. So in other words, standards apply to all grade levels. All grade levels have the same standards, but indicators are grade level specific. So what you see here is basically the code. So how are these written? So first you see ELA, which of course refers to English Language Arts Standards. Then immediately beside that is the grade level. So what we're looking at here is English Language Arts, 6th grade, and then the strand of applications of reading, or it could be F for Foundations of Literacy, R for Research, or C for Written and Oral Communication. Then there's the standard, which again applies to all grade levels, and then the indicator that is specific to different grade levels. Now, The ELA standards were very comprehensively written, and they have some other unique features to point out. So first of all, I want to point out that they are grade level entrance statements. And this provides a really general overview of the grade level and what you should expect at each grade level. Next is what they refer to as indicator insights. And this is just more clear language about what they actually mean within the indicator. There's also a glossary in order to make sure when we say the same things, we understand it as the same thing. There are also some amazingly helpful appendices. And one of my favorite ones is just an at-a-glance view of all the indicators so that you can see how they build from kindergarten all the way through English 4 systematically. So let me give you an example. So this strand is the Foundations of Literacy strand. And what you see outlined by that red line is that there are 4 standards within the Foundations of Literacy. Oops. And again, they include phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, print concepts, decoding and encoding, which is essentially phonics and morphology skills, as well as fluency and concepts of print. Now, if you look over under the indicators, you'll see that phonological awareness has 7 indicators. Print concepts has 5 indicators. Decoding and indicating has 8 separate grade level indicators. Fluency has 3 indicators. Now, as you can see, each grade level may not include every single indicator. So for example, there's only 1 indicator for 2nd grade for phonemic and phonological awareness. Why is that? Well, because the other underlying skills should have been developed prior to 2nd grade. Now, more on what do you do and how do you determine if these have or haven't been mastered? We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, let me show you what this looks like. Again, how incredibly and beautifully systematic the standards are. Well, the standards you see here, this is a screenshot. What does this one standard look like across 3 grade levels? So this is what allows us to look at the entry point for this specific skill. Oops. For this specific skill. And again, what does it look like across grade levels? Now, again, as I mentioned, every indicator does not have an item for each grade level. So let's look at that first row. So again, we're looking at Foundations of Literacy strand, as pointed out by the blue arrow. The first indicator, and that's as pointed out by the green arrow. And again, this is phonemic and phonological awareness. And the indicator number, and that is indicator number 5. That's pointed out by the orange arrow. Now, these indicators, as you see going all the way across, we've got blending and segmenting for onset and rhyme in single syllable words. That's kindergarten. In 2nd grade, we should be blending and segmenting multisyllabic words. Now, beyond that, we don't blend and segment anything bigger than multisyllabic words. So that is why there's not an indicator for 2nd grade. Here's another way to look at it. And this, honestly, for special education, I think this is probably my favorite document for special educators, because as you see here, look at the bottom with the green arrow. That's kindergarten. And you can see how it builds systematically each skill all the way up to English 4, as you see highlighted by that yellow arrow. So again, the beauty of this is it gives you a roadmap. Exactly what are the progressions of skill that need to be developed. And this is what helps us write very clear goals in order to achieve grade level proficiency. Here we see applications of reading. That's the strand that spans kindergarten through English 4. There's 10 standards, 3 of which, if you'll look down at the bottom, there's 3 specific standards just for vocabulary. And I'll go ahead and tell you, spoiler alert, for some of the instructional resources on the last 2 slides, there's already a recorded PowerPoint, a recorded training just on vocabulary already on the SED instructional resource website. Here you see research. That's the strand. It's got 5 standards. Here's the strand for written and oral communication. It has 9 standards. As an important note to some of you in your instructional efforts, let's talk now about SE Ready. So SE Ready in 2025 will shift from TDA, text-dependent analysis, to TDW, text-dependent writing. Why is that? Well, the main reason is because the new standards support extended text-dependent writing items. The other reason for the move to TDW was that was something that teachers expressed was a concern, and so they made that shift. Now, what you see here is the focus based on the different grade bands. So in grades 3 and 4, the focus is on narrative writing. Now, there will be an instructional resource training coming up to SEDE in the fall, specifically on narrative writing. Now, the links you see here, those are rubrics that have already been provided. They've already been rolled out. And so you see one for grades 5 and 6 to persuade through argumentative writing. Grade band 7 and 8 actually has 2 rubrics, one for persuasion and then also one for to inform. So again, those things are already there and available. Now, one question you may be asking is, how did these 2023 SE College and Career Ready ELA standards, how do they align with our curriculums? And the answer is, it varies. So actually, a better answer would be, really and truly, there's no single correct curriculum that is going to meet the needs of every student and every aspect of reading. So you should expect that some supplementation is going to be necessary. And again, the State Department of Education is providing instructional materials to support this. Now, one specific material that is coming out, I think end of May, is a scope and sequence for phonics and phonemic awareness instruction. So look for that to be coming soon. Now, when we talk about your ELA curriculums, it is important that you ask your district what is the new curriculum, as well as receive a copy of the curriculum for each grade level that you teach. So now that you've gotten an idea of the overview of the ELA standards, I hope you really appreciate the depth of work that went into creating such a clear, comprehensive, and consistent set of expectations across grade levels that's aligned with the science of reading. I also hope that you'll appreciate that using these beautifully systematic skills-based standards and indicators is something that we can use in special education to create a very clear roadmap that will lead to improvements in reading instruction for all students, not just special education, not just general education. I also hope that you'll know and appreciate how much this aligns with our SIP, our State Systematic Improvement Plan, because that is based on early reading instruction, which is based on the science of reading, and includes the training that's being rolled out statewide relative to letters. If you have questions about letters and special education, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, a few final things to point out in relationship to the ELA standards are some new state laws that are of critical importance to be aware of. So the first one is Read to Succeed. And you have seen some of the information that's already been sent out in a memo about Read to Succeed. Now, one thing to really point out and spend some time with is the fact that we're relying on scientifically based reading instruction, meaning there has to be evidence that it's effective, that when you provide this instruction, students will begin to master their reading skills. It also includes all of the areas we just talked about, and in addition to oral language development. It also requires valid and reliable assessments. Valid and reliable assessments. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second. But when we talk about valid and reliable assessments, we've got to make sure that we're using these assessments to gather the data to help inform our instruction. So some of you may be familiar with what this is. So if you look at the picture there, that is a picture of a running record. Well, another state law that went into effect was in its annual reading proficiency plan, each district shall document how the reading and writing curriculum and assessment tools for pre-K through 5 students, they have to be aligned with the science of reading, structured literacy, and foundational skills, and any textbooks or instructional materials that employ 3 cueing shall not be used in reading instruction. So I'll say that again. Any materials that employ 3 cueing shall not be used in reading instruction. So I've included the link here for you. But what that means is running records are not aligned with that requirement. Another thing that you'll see is another law that it says they specifically are excluding any materials that include the 3 cueing system. So that would include use of leveled books. So again, there's the link for the law right there, and these are your state laws. Now, finally, one thing that we're going to talk about is what's been rolled out already for general education, but is just as wonderful for special education. And it's referred to the indicator aligned inventory for word recognition. And if you're familiar with the simple view of reading, you appreciate that word recognition is one of the 2 critical skills necessary for decoding. So the indicator aligned inventory is just a tool. It's not an assessment, it's just a tool. And this tool is specific to our South Carolina indicators. Now there's other tools that look at other things, but this is the only one that's aligned to help us determine which grade level indicator might this student be missing. In other words, which holes do we need to plug? Now, it's a completely optional tool, but it's ideal for documenting what are the adverse educational impacts. It's beautiful for designing and writing standards aligned goals, but it is not meant to replace universal screeners. It's not meant to replace any other assessments. It is simply a special tool that is aligned just to our state standards. It also is something you can use for all grade levels. So even if you have special education students in middle school or high school, you could still use this tool to figure out exactly where are the gaps. In other words, we need to plug those gaps, close those gaps in order to make those proficient gains. So here you see a link. This is a link to the tool. And then also there's an example of the tool, and you can see what it looks like. Now, the beauty or the advantage of a tool like this that is specifically aligned with our state standards is that it gives us a very clear map of exactly what a student needs. So if any of you are familiar with this, this is a map of the Magic Kingdom. And if you were to go on a field trip to the Magic Kingdom, which sounds insane, but if you were to go on go to the Magic Kingdom on a field trip, you would use a map. The other thing you would do is even on this field trip, you would take a head count several times along the way in order to make sure all of your students were moving along so that you all end up in Tomorrowland at the same time together. So this map helps us figure out who got lost and where they got lost in order to chart that path to get to Tomorrowland. So again, that is the beauty of that indicator aligned inventory. It helps us figure that out. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up by showing you just a few of the instructional resources that are available. So these are webinars and video recordings, and they're adding several ones again and again and again. Like almost every week, there's a new recording that is being uploaded to the SCDE Office of Assessment and Standards website. So this is a list of a few of them. One to point out specifically is there's one, I mentioned the one about vocabulary, but there's also one on reading comprehension. And what does reading comprehension mean and look like especially as we might want to consider it for our students who are struggling with comprehension. Here's some of the supplemental documents. As I mentioned, there's the glossary. There's a crosswalk, there's the indicator aligned inventory. There's just lots and lots of very helpful documents. One that I hope that you'll sit with is the Foundations of Literacy supplement, as well as the Grammar and Conventions Matrix, as that's something that's going to be very helpful for any of your students who are also working on writing. And that's all I have as a very quick overview of the South Carolina College and Career Ready English Language Arts Standards and Indicators. So if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.
There was just a question about the slides being shared. So, so Angie will get that to Sarah to send out.
Yes. Any other questions about the ELA standards? And actually, I'd be really curious if you would type in the chat if you've already been working on training for the ELA standards, if you've been involved in the training in the ELA standards, if there's a plan going forward for you and your staff to get training on the ELA standards. If anybody would like to put that in the chat, I'd be really interested to see. I think there's a hand that's raised.
Yeah, Angie, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so your presentation you did with Mandy Hawker.
Yes.
On the IAIRW.
Yes.
It's really hard to say. I was just curious, the takeaway when this was shared with me from our ELA department leader was you need to look at this and make sure you write all your IEP goals based on this assessment. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that, please.
So first, I think it's a scary thing to use the words all, always, never when you're talking about IEPs and the individualized instruction. Again, it's one of many tools in your toolbox. But the beauty of this tool is it will tell you exactly where those holes are that you can then use to map out systematically what goals and skills the student needs to master in order to get up to grade level proficiency. But it is something that both general education, special education, multilingual teachers, all of the above can use. It is focused primarily just on the foundations of literacy.
And to be clear, that's too, and this is sometimes when we're writing goals, I just wanted to clarify. I mean, you have diagnostic tools, so this is more of a diagnostic tool. In other words, this is going to clue you in on where the student, like Angie said, might have got lost along the way in the trip of becoming a proficient reader. And so, but ultimately, you're going to have another set that establishes baseline that you can use for progress monitoring. So that's, I would give you that warning before you, because you can't, this isn't a one-stop shop. It's not going to be able to be used as a single device to create and implement a goal, reading goal for a student. But it is a useful tool, diagnostic tool, to know what skills need to be targeted, and then you can complement it with another tool that might give you a baseline and allow you to progress monitor over time.
I think it's a great tool. I'm excited about it. I like the mapping to the standards. I think that's going to be a game changer. And that was where I was headed, Peter. So thank you for that clarification, because I think that some of the naive interpretation and concern was this was our progress monitoring tool for all reading. And like you said, that's really not feasible or appropriate.
Yeah, no, it's not designed. It's not designed for that purpose. No, no, definitely not. I did think, like I said, it was really just an attempt to, which Angie and others just to try to provide another tool for our educators, just to help as a diagnostic. And I do think, it's exciting, but you're right. You can't overexpand it to a use that it wasn't intended for. And
right.
We do have a variety of tools available for measuring progress on goals. And so those are going to have to be used, to complement this once you identify the need.
Great question and great support answer there, Peter. Thank you so much. Any other questions?